I would like to introduce the presenters for our next session. Nicole Valentine. Nicole Valentine is the managing attorney at Goyette, Ruano and Thompson, Inc., where she leads the firm's professional license defense practice. For the last 10 years, she has represented licensees in criminal and administrative proceedings, reversing driver's license suspensions, negotiating dismissals, filing motions to exclude evidence, and negotiating reduced charges for clients.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for having me. What I'm going to talk about is mostly from a California perspective because that's where I practice. And usually I have clients calling me frantically, "Oh my God, a report has been made to the board. I've got this letter. What do I do? What do I do?" How many of you here have a substance abuse problem and are willing to admit it? I don't need to see hands. But there's a lot of you that do and will not admit it. What's important to note is that a nurse doesn't have to actually be caught diverting medications to be reported to their licensing agency. What happens, as Maureen and Sarah have discussed, is these softwares are tabulating discrepancies. And so you don't actually have to get caught red-handed stealing medications to be reported to your state's licensing agency. It could just be the discrepancies that cause the report to be made. So let's talk about after a report is made. Now, in California, what happens is if there's any medication discrepancies, allegations of diversion, a nurse will get a letter, a phone call, or an email from the board's intervention program, aka the diversion program. And that letter will be threatening. It will say, if you don't answer this within 14 days, you could lose your license. Now, the benefits, at least in California, and for most intervention diversion programs across the country, are that it's confidential. If you do, in fact, call the number on the letter, answer the email, give a statement to these individuals, what you say is confidential. We'll talk about, is it really confidential? If you complete the program, there's no publicly posted discipline on your license. That's a huge benefit, especially if you are truly diverting. If you have a criminal case and you're getting the treatment and the help that you need, you can use that. I've used it for my clients as mitigation. Look, this person's getting help, and these programs are pretty extensive with the treatment they provide. The pitfalls of entering a diversion program, especially if you don't have a substance abuse problem and you just have these discrepancies. There's no confidentiality unless you complete the program. You have to sign a contract. It can be a 3 to 5 year program in most states. That is a commitment, especially if you don't live in that home state. Maybe you're a travel nurse. In California, your license goes inactive until a committee decides that you are ready to return to work. And they decide where you can work, whether you can give medications, administer medications to patients. You have to pay all of this out of pocket. You can't work. There's a zero tolerance. You got to go to AA meetings. You got to go to whatever treatment they recommend, whether it be residential, and you got to pay for that out of pocket, outpatient programs. You got to comply with whatever they ask you to do, or you're out of there, and none of that's confidential. And you could be faced with criminal charges, especially if you admitted you have a problem, which in California, that's what they want to hear. They're not going to accept you into this intervention confidential program unless you say, I need help, I have a problem. And then, like I said, the committee decides when you return to work and how you return to work. So who is the diversion program for? Again, I think you have to be a resident in the state that you are going to be doing the program in. You can't leave. Sometimes you can't even go on vacation because you have to randomly drug test. So also mentally ill individuals can also qualify for a diversion program, and you have to voluntarily agree to enter and consent to all types of evaluations, psychiatric, substance abuse. You have to give your consent. Your privacy is gone. And you will not be eligible if you have prior discipline, if you've previously been terminated from the program. If you're selling, they will not admit you to the diversion program, or if you caused a patient harm or death. So again, I talked a little bit about the fact that once you enter this program, your license goes inactive and you cannot work. Again, zero tolerance compliance. If you miss a drug test, you could be kicked out, face discipline, face criminal charges. And again, the confidentiality is not guaranteed. We talked about how long it lasts. The program decides when you're done. I said 3 to 5 years, but again, a committee has to decide, have you successfully completed this program? So it is marketed as a voluntary program, but once you sign that contract, if you don't abide, you're going to be disciplined. So I always recommend, if you get a letter like this, to consult with an attorney, to think about whether you truly need treatment. If you do, you should be entering this program because it is designed to help you. You don't have to answer these letters or emails. I tell clients this all the time because it is a voluntary program. You do not have to respond if you're not interested in getting help or getting treatment or believe you don't need it. But what will happen is, if you don't respond, the boards will send your case to an investigator to start the investigation process. And you could face potential discipline depending on what the allegations are. Same thing, all of a sudden you could get a letter in the mail, you can get an email, or how about an investigator shows up to your workplace to interview you in front of your colleagues? They can show up at your home and say, hey, would you like to submit to a voluntary drug test? On the spot. If you say no, how is that going to look? Because the investigator is collecting all of the information to present to your licensing agency. So you do have rights if you are contacted by an investigator. You have the right to an attorney, which I highly recommend, to walk you through the process. They can attend the investigative interview with you. I've attended hundreds, thousands of investigative interviews with my clients, prepared them for how to respond, reviewed records with them. So you are entitled in California to a copy of the complaint made against you, or a summary of that complaint. And you can see in that, the summary could be vague, oh, nurse diverted. Or it can be very specific. 0.5 milligrams of this drug was pulled, 0.1 given, the rest, no waste. So, in essence, you should be getting an attorney, requesting a copy of the complaint, and you should be receiving a copy because, at least in California, anything that's detrimental, disparaging, or threatening to your reputation, qualifications, benefits, you're entitled to a copy of the complaint against you so that you can accurately respond. Because sometimes you're not diverting. We all make mistakes. We're human beings. I know you nurses are extremely busy. You get distracted with patient care. You get pulled off the floor for XYZ. A code gets called. You're like, oh, I forgot to chart that .1 that I didn't give. And so things happen, and they're going to happen. So, but you have to be able to respond to what those allegations are. At least in California and probably across most licensing agencies, you have a duty to cooperate. Otherwise, you could face discipline for not cooperating with an interview or an investigation. So I always say check your state regulations, consult an attorney. At least in California, there's a Fifth Amendment exception. Let's say you were diverting and you don't want to give a statement admitting it because the investigator is just going to turn that over to law enforcement who will use that against you and file criminal charges. So you do have a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and not respond to an interview. The investigator is going to request your personnel file, see if you've had other discrepancies or discipline, and all of that's going to be turned over to your licensing agency. Even if that prior discipline at work wasn't reported to the board's going to see that, and they're going to use it against you. Questions to expect at an investigative interview. They're going to ask you about your employment history. Have you ever been terminated from a job? Have you ever been written up? Have you ever been disciplined? They'll ask for your resume. And again, an attorney can guide you on how to answer these questions. They're going to ask you your medical history, questions that you believe are private. They're going to go into private details. Have you ever been 5150'd? Have you ever been treated for substance abuse? They're going to ask you to drug test. They're going to ask you about policies, procedures. What's your training? What was your orientation like? Are you familiar with these policies and procedures? Why didn't you follow them? They're going to have your charts. I'm going to pull out all the patient records, show them to you. I see that you pulled XYZ on this date, but you didn't, there's no waste. What happened? And some of these incidents could be like 3 years old, so you're having to answer questions about a patient you handled 3 years ago. So it's going to be tough to remember what happened. So again, you should be vigilant about handling medication administration. Make sure that you chart everything, especially waste. And they'll straight up ask you, hey, did you divert? And we talked about the drug test. So a licensing agency, after the investigator compiles their report, they're going to interview your supervisor, they're going to interview other colleagues. You know, maybe you looked like you were under the influence, maybe they did a drug test on you at work, you came up positive, or maybe you refused a drug test. They're going to ask all these questions. Why'd you refuse a drug test? So once the investigation report with your personnel file is sent over to your licensing agency, they can retain an expert to review your discrepancies, review the charts, write opinions. Perhaps they feel what you did was grossly negligent, unprofessional conduct. An expert is going to look at all of your records, all of the records in the case, and write an opinion. And then after they write that opinion, that with the investigative report will be sent over to the enforcement unit, and whatever prosecutorial agency in your state, in California, it's the Attorney General's office, Department of Justice, they actually compile everything and they file a publicly posted accusation against your license that gets transmitted to nurses. In California, we have Breeze, but nurses will contain all of the allegations that you've ever faced in multiple states. And an accusation could look like nurse pulled X amount of fentanyl, no waste documented. Nurse listed a pain score of 8 and 9. No other nurses on the shift had a patient at that pain score level. It could be allegations where you gave a higher dose and other nurses gave a lower dose. All of these will be reported to the board and placed on that accusation. Or you can have criminal charges. So if you do need help, here's the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services hotline for all of you. There's a crisis hotline, National Drug Helpline. But again, if you are somebody that is considering whether to divert, if you're thinking about it, know that this could cost you your license. Licensing agencies have a zero tolerance, especially when you are caught red-handed diverting. You will lose your license, everything that you've worked so hard for. So definitely think twice before you want to take some off the top. Maybe you're thinking, oh, well, this is going to be wasted anyway. Definitely think twice, because your license is on the line. Thank you.